Good morning. I hope that everyone enjoyed fall break. It was a great few days of rest and reflection and a good reminder of the things that are important to us. And I think that as we gather today, I would just remind us that it is a real privilege that we have here in assembly or in chapel to hear reflection from a variety of people, for them to share parts of their life that illustrate the idea of wisdom more than knowledge, and take the opportunity to think about the experiences that others have. And we have one of those opportunities this morning. As we continue our Honor Speaker series, I am reminded that living an honorable life is more important than ever. And it is a great obligation, responsibility, privilege, and opportunity that we all have. And so the chance to share some reflective time is important for us this morning and every day. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Ethan DeLashman, President of the Disciplinary Committee, who will introduce today's speaker. Thanks, Ethan.
Good morning. It is my pleasure today to introduce the 8th speaker of our Honor Speaker Series, Secretary William Ball III. After completing a 6-year tour of active duty with the United States Navy, Secretary Ball has held a number of senior positions in both the public and private sectors. He began his government services in Washington, D.C. in 1975 on the U.S. Senate staff and served as Chief of Staff to Senators John Tower and Herman Talmadge. In 1985, he joined the Reagan administration as Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs under Secretary of State George P. Shultz. The following year, he was assigned to the White House to serve President Reagan as his chief liaison to the Congress. 2 years later, he was nominated by the President as the 67th Secretary of the Navy. In 2005, he founded Ball & Associates and is a consultant to companies in the defense, energy, and international business sectors. Secretary Ball is the director of the Governor's Defense Initiative for the State of Georgia's Department of Economic Development in Atlanta. A graduate of Georgia Tech, he lives in Alexandria, Virginia, with his wife, Patty. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Ball.
Well, thank you very much, Ethan, for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you this morning at the Darlington School. This is a very special place, and let me congratulate you all at the outset for being part of such an extraordinary community. I have to say it's a little intimidating to stand here in a pulpit. I am the son and grandson of clergymen, and so the Lord chose not to call me to stand in a pulpit as my forebears had done. So when I get in a setting like this, it is intimidating, and I will only hope that the Almighty will bless these proceedings this morning and that you'll benefit in some small way from what I have to say. Now, Ethan informed me he was up for football practice at 5:30, so he is the only student I have given special dispensation to who can doze off during my remarks. And the rest of you will maintain your best classroom demeanor, please. An admiral that I once served under as a young officer in the Navy who passed away last year reminded his officers constantly that we never stop the lifelong process of learning. And it always energizes me, especially to be with those who are engaged in what I hope you will think of as the early stages of your lifetime of learning. And I commend you for having chosen such a special place to pursue your educational journey. Now, you'll have to let me do a small commercial here at the outset. This is the 241st birthday of the United States Navy. So I don't have on my purple Darlington tie, I have on my Navy tie today. I enjoy, respect, and revere the traditions and customs of the United States Navy, and I won't give you a long recitation of them today, but just understand that in the naval service, many things are different. One doesn't say yes, sir, one says aye, aye. The clocks don't ring on the hour with the time of day. The ship's bell denotes the time of day. So we're starting this proceeding at 2 bells, which is 9 a.m., and so at 3 bells, which will be 9:30 a.m., I hope Ethan or someone will remind me of the passage of time, because I shall be brief. I try to adhere to the old axiom, blessed are ye that are brief, for ye shall be invited back. And so I'll hope that at some point in the future, Joe, I'll be invited back. I had a privilege of discussing over breakfast this morning several of you who were there. We covered a wide range of topics, and I'm very pleased to be able to speak to you this morning on the honor system and the customs and traditions that embody that great tradition here at Darlington. 2 nights ago, I sat next to a great friend of mine, a former United States Senator, who was at a special occasion honoring the Navy, and he is a former Secretary of the Navy as well, John Warner of Virginia. And during his remarks, he spoke about his own service in the Navy and the fact that he was a graduate of a school with a rigorous honor system, Washington and Lee University, the home of my good friend, the alma mater of my good friend Frank Barron, who is here and who is a former naval officer and of such seniority that we refer to him affectionately as the Old Salt. And John Warner himself is an old salt, having served in World War II, having served as both a Marine Corps infantryman and a naval officer. But he said something profound, I think, about the honor system. He said one day in the Senate, all 100 senators were in the chamber on the very somber and serious occasion of having to vote to discipline a colleague. And only once every decade does this take place, but this was a vote to discipline a United States senator who had been careless with his finances, or some would say more than careless. And so as the vote was prepared to be called, the senator sitting next to Senator Warner said, "There, but for the grace of God go I. There, but for the grace of God go I." And John Warner said, "You know, it occurred to me right then, because of my experience at Washington and Lee, because I was raised in an early stage on that strong foundation of an honor system, and carry with me to this day the intangible benefit of that honor system. In my mind, the word would be, there but for the grace of God, I will never go." A serious moment in the history of the Senate when they took an action that was irrevocable to enforce what is essentially the Senate's version. It's antecedent of the honor system you have established here at Darlington. So I thought that was a profound statement from a man who has lived an entire career in public service, far longer than me, and who has seen the significant impact on public service and the nation's health and welfare of the upbringing that he and others like him have had under the system you have in place here. Not far from my home in Alexandria, Virginia, which is a somewhat historic old river town on the Potomac River, is the campus of the Episcopal Theological Seminary. Outside the library there's a stone inscription quoting a former teacher and dean there from the 19th century, one William Sparrow. And he taught his students at the seminary beginning in 1841 with this fundamental maxim, quote, "Seek the truth, come whence it may, cost what it will," unquote. Now, when I walk by that library, which I do all too infrequently when I'm out doing a somewhat rigorous walk, and when I've missed morning football practice, did a little exercise, I'll sometimes stop by and read that inscription. with appreciation to this long-departed professor for defining such a memorable and powerful connection between honor and truth. I can only imagine that his classroom lectures explain this inextricable link connecting the individual sense of honor with the individual search for and respect for truth. So fast forward from 1841 to this tumultuous election year. It cannot have escaped your notice that truth, or as The Economist magazine said in a recent cover story, the emergence of post-truth politics has diminished and tarnished the political campaign debate in our country. This article explains that post-truth is the reliance on assertions that, quote, feel true, but have no basis in fact. Now, politicians in our system, let's be clear, have since the founding of this republic been known to stretch the truth, perhaps shade the facts, maybe steer the debate so as to put their actions and words in the most favorable light possible. I once had an encounter with my boss at the time, the President of the United States, on a legislative issue involving essentially a statement of principle and his own sense of honor. In our system, you know, when Congress passes ill-advised or overly expensive legislation, the president, and only the president, can exercise the veto pen and send that bill back to Congress. So we were working diligently on a bill to spend billions of dollars on highways under the Highway Trust Fund in our country in 1986. The bill was not a little bit over budget, it was 50% over what the president had asked Congress to appropriate. And so the president's advisors, I among them, had warned Congress that if this bill was passed and not changed, he would veto the bill. So, of course, highways are very popular in Congress, as you can understand. This would be referred to by some as pork barrel spending, and others would refer to it as essential highway improvements, which we have a lot of in Georgia. Nevertheless, the bill arrived on the president's desk with no reduction in funding, and my job was to explain to the president, Mr. President, this is a very popular piece of legislation. It has passed Congress overwhelmingly, and it is, yes, it is way over budget, but sir, I have to inform you that if you choose to veto this bill, we are not likely to have the votes to sustain your veto, meaning you could be overridden, of course. And the President of the United States, I could sense at the moment perhaps I had said something unfortunate, impugning his sense of honor. And he said to me, somewhat acerbically, well, what on earth does that have to do with it? So I was put in my place. I had given him the risks. I had told him his statement of principle had been conveyed and communicated, but that we couldn't ensure his success, and maybe he should consider changing his position and signing this bill. That would certainly have made my job a lot easier. But no, I had perhaps crossed the line in suggesting that he take back a statement to Congress that he would not sign this bill if it was over the budget. So we learn lessons sometimes about honor from unexpected sources. And I never thought that I would have a President of the United States so effectively put me in my place. 2 years later, he appointed me Secretary of the Navy, and as I went in for my final photo and handshake with him, he sent me a note along with the photo and said, Will, the reason I've sent you off to sea to run the Navy is so that I don't have to listen to you tell me that somehow I have to get along with this Congress. So that's a real treasure and an unforgettable moment. But thinking of presidents, I reflect on the fact that my first presidential election campaign that I'm conscious of was in 1964. I was the age of many of you. I was a high school Jr., up the road in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And President Lyndon Johnson was running for re-election, and he was opposed by Republican Senator from Arizona, Barry Goldwater. I can even remember the messages portrayed in the dueling TV ads that ran way back then, one of which was, quote, "In your heart, you know he's right." Well, I was fortunate to get to know Senator Goldwater later when I was on the staff of the Armed Services Committee, and I kept thinking how quaint that slogan sounds in the context of today, alongside the rhetoric that we hear exposed in the debates in this presidential campaign. And I must say, I often think, as a Navy person, how do our servicemen and women who are wearing the cloth of our nation, how do they react to the current level of political discourse, and how do those who are on watch on distant shores around the world, how defending America's interests and principles, how they must feel when they react to what they hear in this debate back home. After all, they are living today in the service. They are living today by a motto which mentions only three simple but powerful words. They are honor, courage, and commitment. These qualities are not voluntary guidelines. They're not benchmarks for behavior or workplace rules of conduct between the hours of 9 and 5, but rather they are core values set down as imperatives for being given the privilege of wearing the uniform of the United States Navy and the other armed forces of the United States, 24 hours a day. I think of no greater symbol of the power of that uniform and that service than Senator Barry Goldwater's successor, Senator John McCain, who succeeded him in the seat that he still holds today in Arizona. As Joe Montgomery knows, having been a young lad next door to the McCain family, Senator McCain was captured by the North Vietnamese and held prisoner in the Hanoi Hilton. And after 4 years of imprisonment, he was offered the opportunity for early release by his captors. But his own personal sense of honor drove him to decline the offer to go home, because under the rules, under the steadfast rules of the POWs in Vietnam, they were to be released only in the order by which they had been captured. And there were several men in that prison camp who had been there longer than John McCain. And so he declined the release and spent 2 more years in prison, and much of which was in solitary confinement, and much of which under torture we know about today. So think about that. For the sake of his personal honor, he chose to remain with his fellow POWs at great personal cost. Probably one of those instances where an individual's sense of honor leads to consequences that are not foreseen and yet fully consistent with the way he viewed his obligations to his country. So this is an element that is essential to our concepts of a free society. We recognize that this sense of honor, this individual devotion to this code that we uphold, is a bedrock of moral values in this free society that simply can't be replaced. It is a bedrock most certainly founded, in addition, on freedom, on duty, on honor, and on truth. And that gives hope to those of us old salts who can look back to 50 years ago and then move our gaze out to the clear horizon that reaches to 50 years from now. And perhaps some of you will look back on the year 2016 from the perspective of 2066 and remember what you saw and heard and learned here at Darlington as you came of age in a complex world and a daunting time for our nation. And as you envision your own individual path to that far time in the future, I hope you will take with you on your journey the strong personal sense, the core value of honor instilled in you from your experience in this place and made ever more critical to our nation's future and the kind of world you and the generation after you will be facing. And for the sake of that future and our country's future and that of the world we live in, we of my generation must place great faith in your sense of purpose, your ambition to succeed, your intelligence, your discipline, and your commitment, but above all, your sense of honor, and with it, your sense of responsibility and duty to the obligations of freedom. So I leave you with words that can undergird your own honor when tested by the times we live in. Those words of William Sparrow, 1841, etched in stone on a campus in Virginia. Seek the truth, come whence it may, cost what it will. Thank you very much for letting me be with you, and as we say in the Old Navy, good luck and Godspeed.